Welcome back to Vinyl History, everyone. Today we have Professor Rotolo from Glendale College, who teaches an amazing course in rock and roll history. And today we're going to discuss Easy Rider, one of the most important musical scores and movies of its generation. It exploded on the scene in 1969, speaking to an entire generation of people who felt they hadn't been spoken to before, both in the cinematography and the soundtrack, and the overall rebellious message. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Well, welcome to Vinyl History, Professor. It's so great to have you here, and looking forward to it. And we're here to talk about Easy Rider, as I managed to get an actual vintage copy of the LP, which I thought was just incredible. The artwork is just incredible. But I know when you and I were first talking, we really need to kind of step backwards before Easy Rider became the phenomenon it did. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we should go back about 10 years to February 3rd, 1959. This is the fateful day the music died. This claimed the lives of Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper and Ritchie Valens. And at that point, rock and roll had had its first flourishing. But there were sort of a series of unfortunate events that sort of led to this sort of low period in rock's history, and we weren't really sure where it was going at that point. Little Richard had joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He had left music. Elvis had been drafted into the military in 1958, and so there were these stars that had sort of, in the first flourishing of rock and roll, given energy to the youth, and after their departure, we weren't really sure what was in store for rock and roll. And so for a few years after that, there was this rebuilding kind of. There's still great music being written, of course. Roy Orbison and the Everly Brothers, and
they got drafted too, by the way.
True, yeah, absolutely, yes, and it certainly impedes process.
Yeah.
But I think what really kicked off this new joie de vivre, you might say, is the day and year that many believe the 60s started, which was November 22nd, 1963.
Oh, Kennedy.
Which was John F. Kennedy's assassination. Up until then, there was this feeling that there was this still sort of, well, maybe we could get back to normal. There was a new, young, youthful president in the White House, and sort of reflected a little bit more of this youthful spirit and this positivity. But after that day, many in the culture, that sort of was a shattering event. And
that's a great point, actually. I remember people have talked about, where were you that day, people that were around. It's before my time, but you're right. He was such a youthful, vibrant, we're going to go to the moon and all that stuff, and then he was gone. And, as a society, that's an impact. A major impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it led to questioning the establishment, and music begins to reflect that. In 1959, a young man from Duluth, Minnesota, named Bob Dylan, moves to, well, his name is Robert Zimmerman, was his name, but he had cultivated this Bob Dylan persona. Mm-hmm. He moves to Greenwich Village, New York. He begins singing about sort of being the raconteur of his generation, singing about Medgar Evers being killed, and with God, songs like "With God on Their Side" and "Blown in the Wind" and all of these songs, and so this really inspires a young new movement of young writers and artists and musicians to begin to try and make their work reflect their experiences, and it's out of that milieu that comes the producers of Easy Rider,
really?
Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider. Okay, at that point, around 1962, they're working in New York. They had almost certainly been encountering the new folk movement that was in Greenwich Village at the time.
My mom lived down there, by the way, and the coffee houses and all that stuff. She thought it was the coolest thing in the world.
I bet it was. I wish I had spent more time there when I was still living on the East Coast.
Wow. Yeah.
But they were sort of lamenting that their field, Hollywood was not quite looking out for these new, was not quite on the same page as the music scene was, and so they set out for Hollywood.
We talked about it before about so much of the music and culture, I guess, and it was really beginning to shift to the West Coast.
Yes.
Which so obviously that is, they were pioneers of all that. It's sort of an interesting structure of rock and roll history that people don't discuss, that sort of East Coast to West Coast, and then it was a whole nother thing, so fascinating.
Television, especially television, became the medium, and actually without television, rock and roll sort of had this almost overnight explosion in the middle 50s, of course, after Elvis, 1954, gets broadcast on television, and there's more and more investment from the powers that be to put music for young people on screen, and that begins to happen, especially in the early 60s. Rafelson and Schneider were instrumental in taking the model of A Hard Day's Night, film A Hard Day's Night, starring the Beatles.
Are we allowed to say the Beatles? Is that we allowed to say the Beatles?
Okay. Yeah. The idea was to bring that model and a band very much like the Beatles to television for young people, and that was the Monkees. So
fascinating.
These producers were ready to integrate the music of the youth into Tinseltown.
So they really understood what was coming, or what the presentation to the world at large of the young people, sort of before probably a lot of people did.
Absolutely, I think that's absolutely right.
So in the mid '60s, what people don't, I think, realize is, again, you were mentioning the Monkees is and the Beatles were obviously established, is that the change in music, from the peace and love to the psychedelic to the hippie movement, that happened really quickly. It was a relatively short period of time where there was obviously things going on underneath that were reflective of what people wanted or felt. And so if you could talk about that a little bit.
It really kicks off with the Summer of Love in 1967. It's really, in my view, the Cambrian explosion of rock and roll. There's this huge leap. There's this huge leap forward in the evolution of rock and roll. I mean, there was some rumblings, especially in the Haight-Ashbury around 1965, but by 1966, the end of 1966, the Beatles had stopped touring. They had been, they began their trips to India. You had albums like Pet Sounds in 1966, which is really one of the, after Revolver, you have Pet Sounds. These are really the two sort of arbiters of what we know to be psychedelia in the next few years.
The hippie riots, too. I was just talking to my mom about the hippie riots at the end of '66 on Sunset Boulevard.
Summer 1967, the Summer of Love, kicked off, actually, well, it's the Year of Love. It kicks off in January of 1967 with the Human Bee Inn, very famous Human Bee Inn, where the Haight-Ashbury district sort of spills out into Golden Gate Park. This is really the first time where hippies were really visible in a real cultural sense. People could see them, they could hear the music, they could experience the art, and then the year 1967 is just like I said, just a huge leap forward. And once you have albums like Are You Experienced in May of '67, followed by, of course, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Yeah. Once you have those albums out, you can't really get that toothpaste back in the tube. There's really no going back. I think of that point. I think of rock history as my own view, but I think it's really everything before psychedelia and really everything after psychedelia. I think everything after psychedelia really, in their own way, has to deal with the legacy of this movement. It's really a time where rock and roll moves from simply a sound and simply a music that teenagers and the youthful want to dance to and move to something that almost transcends simple guitar, bass, and drums. You have the advent of rock and roll journalism with Jan Wenner founding Rolling Stone in San Francisco in 1967.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that San Francisco.
Yeah, San Francisco. Style, fashion, and I would say rock and roll filmmaking as well.
Good point, yeah.
Hollywood has always been a bit further downstream from the music. It tends to start with the music. Always seems to start with the music.
It's funny, just the scope of doing a big-time movie and big-time TV show, and just the scope that it gets to in the public is so much larger now. You know, the scale. Just for what it's worth, I'll refer to the Everly Brothers, but the scale of music, the business, and then with TV and movies together is on a scale from the 50s that nobody could have dreamt of. The power. What they realized is there was so much power to all of these political messages, cultural messages, style messages, music messages, art messages of any kind that, I think, back to what we'll talk about in Easy Rider, but, I don't think anybody realized what you could do.
What we hadn't figured out yet in the 1960s was how to really reflect yet, and I would say that Dennis Hopper and his collaborators figured that out. We hadn't figured out how to put what was going on in the middle and late 60s, how to reflect that on screen. There's a quote from Dennis Hopper that we hadn't yet seen ourselves on screen. That at the time of, in the middle 60s, people were still, at least Hollywood was still producing films starring Doris Day and Rock Hudson.
Do you think, were they aware of the magnitude of what they were doing when they put that kind of music on there, or was it strictly just we think this is cool, like most cool people? They're like, I just thought it was cool.
Well, the soundtrack for Easy Rider is really the songs for Easy Rider is the temp track actually for the film. They wanted to commission Crosby, Stills and Nash to provide the soundtrack.
Okay,
but Dennis Hopper for certain reasons vetoed that. Would have been a great choice, I think, but instead they really stuck with Steppenwolf and Jimi Hendrix and Roger McGuinn and the band and yes.
Do you have a favorite song from? I know that's trying to pick a favorite child probably, but
I really like "I Wasn't Born to Follow," which is about the fourth. It's the fourth song on the record on the soundtrack. Carole King, Jerry Goffin wrote it.
Always a winning combination.
Yep. I just love that song. I love the spirit of that.
Yeah.
I love the frankness of it. And I love how it plays in the film. I mean, it plays over the segment of the film that where they're on the commune. They're sort of, they're really at their most free, I think, at that moment in the film.
Right. And
I think that's what really makes that song for me.
I was listening to the Hendrix song "If 6 Were 9," which, the more I heard it, the more I loved it, because it's just so Hendrix. It's just such a Hendrix, and maybe you could talk about some of the lyrics that he talks about. He mentions, if hippies cut their hair, or he addresses the moment kind of very, very, very much of the film itself. He addresses in his own thoughts. Is there anything? Can we talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think it speaks very much to the power of Hendrix and his music. This might be a little bit of a tangent, but he always has these. He makes these points like. I'm standing next to a mountain. I chop it down with the edge of my hand. You can't do that physically, but he's really not talking about it physically. He's saying if I can change my inner self, if I can perceive, if I can just change what's in here,
right,
then anything's possible. My outer, if I just change my inner world, that my outer world is possible. It's a very spiritual thing. It's biblical. I mean, it goes back to, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can move a mountain. Those kind of things. And I think he's always sort of had those lyrics that speak to that. If you're looking for, if you're not getting, if the outside world is not giving you what you want, if they're rejecting you, or the way these individuals are treated in the film, really what you need to do, what you can do, is what you have the most power over is change your way of thinking.
The song seems deeper than it sounds on first listen. Like there's a lot of depth there, and that's, like I said, as I listened to it a few times, that I'm like, all right, he's really, this is cutting a lot deeper than you think it is, and which is, he's fantastic, and people don't give him you need to dig into Hendrix too, obviously, which is so great. Let's talk about Born to Be Wild, because that song is just so epic, and it encompasses so much of the film. It's in the opening of it, but the word heavy metal thunder, and just talk about that song, if you would.
It's one of the first examples that we have of that phrase, heavy metal.
Love that.
We had some allusions to heavy metal in the writing of William S. Burroughs, but as far as in music, we're not really sure where heavy metal exactly comes from, but Born to Be Wild is that.
Okay.
I think it's so perfect for the film. They're riding these chariots of chrome through the desert looking for adventure. Mm-hmm. I think Born to Be Wild, the legacy of that song, it's a rallying cry. I mean, it's a rallying cry for those who might feel that they were born to be that way.
Yeah.
And that if they were looking for, their own community, it's out there.
That's fantastic.
They just need to take to the road
and
go out. And actually, that's the story of Steppenwolf, which was actually a novel from 1927 written by Hermann Hesse.
Okay.
In which this character, coming from polite society, feels that maybe that's not where he belongs, and so he goes on this journey through a number of different, just like these characters do, just like the characters in Easy Rider. He goes through these journeys of physical experimentation, sexual experimentation, just looking for a different path. And I think that's Born to Be Wild.
I was just wondering if Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda really understood what, did they do it just because they knew people needed to hear this music with the film? Or did they just think it was cool, like I said, or did they go, hey, we have the magic formula, we know what's going to work? I don't think they knew.
I don't think they did. I don't think they did. I think it was really guerrilla filmmaking. It was really independent filmmaking, which is really inspired by the music industry. I think from its early days, rock and roll had to be an independent grassroots movement. The mainstream record companies didn't want really any part of it. There was this. And the smaller record labels like Chess Records and VJ Records and all these, they had to press their records very cheaply and then figure out how to get regional DJs to play them using certain tactics like payola and whatever they could do. And this film was made very much the same way. I don't think they really knew. But I think that they were following this spirit that they had been inspired by, this spirit of rock and roll that they were inspired by, to kind of bring that aesthetic.
Yeah, I mean,
Hollywood.
they must have said, these are the great songs of today, and this speaks to us today, and therefore it matches with the film, because choosing the movie being what it is, and as you know very well, with the dialogue there's a lot of mystery to the dialogue. So the music really takes a giant position, not that it shouldn't, but it particularly so, in my opinion, on the film when they're riding and you hear, get your motor running and a heavy metal highway and all those things that had never been heard before. But it really provides you have time to think about what's going on in the film. What are they thinking while you're hearing the music? It's very much in my opinion, kind of a cerebral exercise. So the fact that the music itself is like, I can't imagine the movie with something else, obviously. It'd be very hard.
The movie almost seems improvised. Jack Nicholson claims that there was a script, but he also claims that they did their best to make it seem seem improvised. I think it was a bit of both, but it is one of the first examples that we have of a film being, as Peter Biskind writes in his great book, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. He claims that it's the first example that we have of a film being, as he says, yoked to the music of 60s rock and roll. This is they're inextricable from one another, and the songs really narrate their journey throughout the whole film.
I agree.
They both describe what's happening and predict later happenings in the film, and so it's
fascinating.
A real synergy between music and action.
It really is. Like I said, when in watching the film just recently again, that you have to really think to yourself, what's going on? What are the lyrics to the music? What am I feeling right now as they're just kind of going about their business? And you have to interpret, their journey, where they're going, what are they thinking? And it was, not saying it's a lot of work, but it's a very fun artistic way of showing you a movie that you don't, you have to really go, wait a minute, what are they thinking? Because they're obviously confused. They're trying to find their place, and and society is pulling out from underneath them, and so many other things that people have watched the film. But they're figuring it out. The music's kind of helping the audience maybe figure it out. What's right, what's wrong, and anyway, neither here nor there, but it's fascinating.
So many powerful moments. The film starts with actually the first song we hear is a Steppenwolf song called "The Pusher," and that really sets up our characters Billy and Wyatt, also referred to as Captain America several times, which is somewhat poetic.
It is
throughout the film, but it's the first lines of the song are talking about, I've smoked a little grass, and this is a wild way to open a film that was going to play at the Cannes Film Festival in May.
But the open drugs thing, we may have seen it a bunch of times before in this day and age, but at that time, that must have been
and they
shocking.
put it right there on screen. The music really tells you who these characters are right from the get-go, and then of course over the opening credits to the film after our prologue, which actually has a funny cameo from Phil Spector.
Oh yeah.
In the very beginning of the film.
I thought it was Phil Spector. I was like,
Phil Spector.
And we talked about it before, but in the theme of the film, I know in the beginning, Peter Fonda famously takes off his watch in the beginning while he's ready to go on this ride of, let's say, discovery or exploration or running, whatever he was doing. But he takes off his watch and throws it away because he doesn't need it anymore. And can we speak to kind of what the message of the film, so much of America's left me behind. I went looking for America and I couldn't find it. Essentially, that whole displacement. Can you speak about that? Both from what was happening in the real world, essentially, and then how this movie reflected that a bit.
Absolutely. The movie comes out in widely in July 1969, and at that point, we had come through a period of American history that was somewhat tumultuous. I mean, we have the just 1 year before, you have the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in April of 1968, and then just later on the same year, you have Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s assassination. You have the election of Richard Nixon, who, while campaigning to wind down the war in Vietnam, immediately, as soon as he takes office in the beginning of 1969, ramps up the war. And those efforts that were made by the hippies of 1967, the Summer of Love, just 1 to 2 years before, to kind of through music and through demonstration, were seemingly thwarted. There was this creeping sense that the mainstream and the counterculture were sort of diverging. While the counterculture wanted to have impact in more overt political ways, that they couldn't quite make the impact that they wanted to. And so him throwing this away, and really throughout the whole film, there's an attempt by these two characters, Billy and Wyatt, to get rooms at various motels, to ingratiate themselves with the city cultures and various people along the way. And at every turn, they're sort of getting turned away, and they get increasingly frustrated by that. And that's really reflected in the music. That's really reflected in absolutely. It's reflected in the music.
So in the Summer of Love being which is more of a, some would say more of a rebellious, but in an optimistic kind of, to a really kind of more jaded, cynical kind of rebellion. A little darker than I guess it had been, because really some real frustration, and you can see with the things that you just discussed about the assassinations and stuff, and then a war happening, and people might feel a little lost. And
at the end of the film, there's the very last song you hear, really before the characters meet their demise, is Bob Dylan's "It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding." It's done in a new version by Roger McGuinn. Dylan didn't want to contribute his version. He gives it to Roger McGuinn, and there's a number of lines in that song that really reflect that feeling. I don't know if Dylan knew it when he was writing it in the early '60s, but it comes back around. It's certainly prophetic in a sense. And one of them is "There Ain't No Use in Trying." That's echoed by Peter Fonda's character after their friend has been murdered, after they've been chewed up and spit out by New Orleans, and they're out in the woods. He says very famously in the film, "We lost it," and his friend Billy is saying, "Well, what do you mean? We're good. We got our money. We're free." But Wyatt he wasn't never thinking about it that way. And he was really never as happy as he is in the beginning of the film when they are on a commune, skinny dipping and enjoying the freedom, being out in away from that society. And he sort of is in this place of there was something there. We had for a moment there, just like we had in 1967. There was for a fleeting moment. We had that positivity. We had that hope. We had that.
Yeah, that's just that.
We had that spirit, and we seem to have lost it.
I guess that's what makes the movie, and from my point of view, there's the with anybody or anything, having optimism of the youth be crushed, or certainly, you become very cynical. That's a bitter pill for the youth, particularly at the time, and obviously, again, reflective of the wider world that was going on. It must have been very very difficult for people. And so to have this film come along reflecting exactly that arc that you were saying in the beginning, they were, hey, it's all good. We're just going to be a little more, open and free. And then realizing that that's not really possible, is a tough one,
Rock and roll started out trying to conform. I mean, in its first iterations, going back into the 50s, it started out trying to figure out, we have a new music. For the first time, we are making music for the youth, and I would say later on for the youthful, for the young at heart. But what do we need to do to be seen on the same plane as the more legacy sort of artists? And they tried for a number of years, and you see that in the style. There's still sort of very, very presentable artists being put on television. Of course, famously, you couldn't shoot Elvis, from the below the waist. But as it kind of goes on, as rock and roll continues to evolve, there's an increasing suspicion that maybe that's not the way we're going to end up going. Maybe actually we're actually going to make our own, we're going to, instead of going to the mainstream, we'll make our own stream.
Yeah, it was. I know. I mean, I'm speaking from my father's point of view, and it was all the questions all the time. There was, what are you going to do when this is over? What are you going to, there was no talk of it continuing at all past a young fad. Oh, the young people have something. It's rebellious. That's cute, but the adults are still kind of in charge, and that was the vibe. He said, and he said a lot of the music reviewers, music interviewers at the time, they were older. They were from the older generation. They were all, he's like, we were 18, 19, and they were in their 30s or 40s. And then in the 60s, all of a sudden, there were young people that were all of a sudden hip to a whole nother thing going on. And still mainstream, like you said, it's a fickle beast. These are all, pick your flavor of the month of rebel, of one thing or the other that, you can get people to rally against, but the art still has to come, and it still has to express how the youth feels, and no matter what, it seems. So, but one of the things I wanted to mention to you, and I know you know this, is that the film had a ridiculously low budget, and it made a tremendous amount of money, relatively speaking. So obviously, it was very successful with all the elements we've talked about. Can you talk about how that impacted the film business and Hollywood from there out?
Well, Rafelson and Schneider, the producers that eventually allowed Dennis Hopper to make Easy Rider, really wanted to inspire an American new wave, what came to be known as the New Hollywood, and they proved that with their independent production label. It began as Ray Burt, and then became later on with Burt Schneider's good friend Steve Blauner. BBS went on to make great movies like Five Easy Pieces, another movie based around music, in that case classical music, Carnal Knowledge. The list goes on. They really proved that they could make these, that not only could they make films, but they could put in the hands of young creators, sort of give them more of a say in how in this more auteurist way. It helped many careers. And of course, the Hollywood mainstream took notice. They said, well, they made this film for, the sum total is between $400,000 and $500,000. And it made about, I believe it was $40 million.
I think it was 60 actually.
60. That's the other number I was thinking of.
There's
$60 million.
A lot of money at the time.
Yes, it made a lot of money. And it was a huge hit. And so Hollywood says, hey, we know that we've got passionate young artists with a vision, and we know that we don't have to give them a ton of money to do what they want, and that's really all the incentive they needed.
Yeah.
But yes, you have the new Hollywood. You have Brian De Palma, Martin Scorsese. You have these filmmakers making films like Mean Streets.
But right after this, I mean,
right after.
So it changed filmmaking too.
In
a big way.
Oh, absolutely. And we have films like Apocalypse Now that begins with The Doors.
Yeah, right.
You have more and more Martin Scorsese putting the role. I mean, he still does in his films, putting the Rolling Stones all throughout his films.
That's true.
And it really allowed there to be even more collaboration between rock and roll and Hollywood after this film.
That's an incredible legacy, honestly, if you think about it from just a musical point of view. Putting that kind of music on films, doing it for not that much money, having a massive impact, speaking to the youth, and then inspiring a whole new host of young filmmakers that have given us, you would change the 70s and 80s as we know it without, sort of the inspiration and setup that Easy Rider kind of gave to them, which is, it really is just incredible. I mean, and hearing the songs even from Easy Rider now is just that the fact that you put the song, one or two of the songs or three of the songs on, and you know exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about, I'm on a motorcycle, I'm riding on the open road, or I'm just trying to get away. I'm, all the sort of messages that the movie kind of inspired, but, almost 60 years later, you're talking about everybody still understands it and grabs that, which is, how many films can say that, from a sort of a real youth spirit kind of way. I don't know, it's incredible.
Here's what I think the impact of Easy Rider is especially in the long term. I think it really comes down to what Dennis Hopper said about the film is we hadn't yet seen a film that we hadn't yet put ourselves on screen. I think that really is the legacy of Easy Rider, that each generation of musicians and filmmakers, writers can express themselves on screen, put themselves in the characters, make a personal art that is an art that's both personal as well as sort of shared by others. And I think that's what the legacy is. That it really proves that there's a room for alternative voices that can be put on screen. And I think that's really what the legacy is. I mean, there's so much to talk about, but I really think that's what it. I think that's part of it.
That's what people. I agree with you completely. That's a great way to put it. Because at every stage in the future, long after we're not here, there's going to be art that needs to speak to whatever it is that's that bothers people or that they need to say and do, and the fact that it came out at just the right time to deliver the message that everybody sort of, I guess, needed to hear, both from the I'm feeling this way as a young person, and then maybe the wider audience needed to go, oh, the youth they're not feeling like they're connected. Maybe we should address this. It's a big message done in a very, very cool film. The metaphoricness of the riding down the open road, which is a very American kind of thing, and then putting such fantastic music along with it also tells the story. I mean, it's like, how can this not be a success? But at the time, obviously, was it assumed that it was going to be successful, I guess, or was it Obviously, I don't know how anybody can know. You can't really know these things, but
After the Cannes Film Festival,
they knew.
They knew.
Okay.
I believe it was Jack Nicholson that said that the studio executives, Columbia Pictures, was the company that distributed the film, and Schneider and Rafelson worked with them later on to distribute the movies that they produced. And I believe it was Jack Nicholson that said, I'm sorry if I'm misattributing this, but somebody said that the executives would shake their heads in disapproval when we were making the film, and then after the Cannes Film Festival, they would shake their heads in disbelief that this was the phenomenon that it was.
Right.
So no, they didn't believe in it until they saw it. But then yes.
Then they knew what was going to happen. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a great honor. Thank you. Thank you.
Please like this video and subscribe to this channel. It helps us a lot.